Today we're going to show you the difference of two of the most powerful tools in Photoshop. This is going to be curves versus levels, plus some surprise hidden features. So we're starting off here in Photoshop. Now I have a background layer. There's actually a couple ways that you can apply curves and levels. The first way is to apply it directly to a layer, and the second is to make an adjustment layer. So let's do both and kind of talk about the pros and cons. So if you want to apply it directly to a layer, you can go to Image, down to Adjustments right over here, and then we're going to go to Curves. Fantastic. Now, just as a real quick example, I'm going to take this dark levels and make it a little bit brighter, just kind of like brightening up the shadows of my image, and we hit OK. Now, that's kind of okay, but it applies that adjustment directly to your background. And let's say I want to make a change later. I don't have that option because it's literally like it's baked into that background image. So that's actually not the method that I would suggest using. I suggest using adjustment layers instead. So let's hit Control-Command-Z for undo. Here's what I want to do. We're going to go to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and then you can choose levels or curves. So we're going to start here with curves. All right, let's hit OK here and click on our layers. So as you can see now, we have our background, but we also have a curves adjustment layer. Now this is really cool because I have a layer mask with my curves adjustment layer, which means I can make it visible in only certain areas of the photo if I want to. And I can simply double click right here, get into my properties window, and then I can do the same thing that I just did. I basically just brought my shadows up a little bit brighter, but check this out. If I want to go back and change that at any time, let's say I'm back in my layers, I want to go back and change that, simply just double click right here and I can change it at any time. So rather than going to Image, down to Adjustments, and then over to Curves, I suggest going to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and then doing curves or levels. Okay, so that's just a little bit of house cleaning out of the way. Now let's talk about curves versus levels. So let's go ahead. We're going to keep this curves adjustment layer. You can see it says curves right there in my properties window. I'm going to go right down here to the bottom and reset that. Okay, so it's going to go all the way back to the original. Nothing has changed here. Let's go to our layers. Now, there's two ways you can make adjustment layers in Photoshop. First one we already showed you. Go to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, and then Curves or Levels. You can do it here, okay? Or you have this little icon right down here, bottom of your layer panel. You go right down over here, boom, and then you can click on Curves or Levels, okay? And it's the exact same thing. It just two different ways of getting to the exact same result. Okay, so we have now a levels adjustment layer and a curves adjustment layer, each with their own layer mask. Okay, so let's kind of talk about the similarities first, and then we'll talk about the differences between them. Okay, so let's start with levels because levels are a little bit more simple. Curves get a little bit more advanced. Okay, with the levels, you have two graphs, two sliders. Okay, you have your top, which is your input. There we go. And then don't forget this bottom slider here as well. A lot of people don't know about this bottom slider, but it's really powerful. Okay, so up here at the top, basically what it does, you can take this point here, and this is your black point. So what it does, this is your histogram, by the way. You see this light information here? That's your histogram. Okay, so when I take this point and move it over to the right-hand side, basically what it's doing, I'm setting my black point here, it's gonna take all of this information here on the left-hand side, all this, and it's just gonna make it pure black, okay? See, as I keep going and going and going, it's just making more and more of my image pure black, okay? Now, as you might have guessed, the opposite side is gonna be pure white. So if I take this and start to bring it over from the right to the left, all of this information right here on the right-hand side, that's just gonna get pure white. Okay, let's bring that over. And now this is our midpoint. It's basically just gonna push the midpoint lighter or darker. Okay, so that's basically how this works. Don't forget, you can go down here and hit reset at any time, this little reset icon, and it's gonna reset. Fantastic. Now the slider down here, this is your black point, but this makes your blacks lighter. So if I want the darkest point of my image to get lighter, I can do that right here with my output levels, okay? There we go. You can see now it's just like a light gray for the darkest point. Over here on the right-hand side, it's going to take my lightest point and it's going to make that darker. There we go. So that's a crash course of how levels adjustment work. Now, you might be asking, can you do that with curves? And yeah, you can. So let's show you how to do it. Let's go back to our layers here. So that was our levels, right? We're going to double click right here where it says curves. And this is what curves looks like. You have a slider here and then, you know, your histogram here as well. Now here's a little cheat sheet, just a little tip. Curves and levels they basically do almost the exact same thing. It's basically just a different way of representing the same information. You still have your histogram here, you have your darks, you have your lights. Curves are a little bit more powerful, you can do a little bit more, but basically, you know, you're editing the same amount of information. There's no like pixels or color or information that one can access over the other. It's like they're both literally accessing the same light and dark and color information. Okay. Now, remember here with levels where we made our black point, you know, we moved that over to the right, okay? And that's gonna make the darks darker, or we can make the darks lighter. And over here, we can make our white point over here, basically pushing more of the image to white, or we're gonna take our white point and make that darker. So we can do that here with curves as well. It's just all gonna be in the same exact graph. Okay, so what we're gonna do, we can take this point here, this little slider here, and we're just gonna bring that over from the left to the right. And you get it. That's your black point moving over. It's basically taking all this information and making it pure black. Now, if you want to make your black point lighter, you just take this icon here, this little square, you just take this and make it a little bit brighter, okay? So I've done both of these at the same time. I brought my black point in, basically making more of my image pure black, but then I'm taking my pure blacks and I'm making them a little bit brighter, okay? There we go. On the right-hand side, you can do this by making more of your image pure white. It's going to take all this information, make it completely white. And then if I want to make my lights darker, I can do this simply by dragging that down as well. Okay, so it's basically, I can do pretty much the same thing here with both of those. With the levels, you know, you get your blacks and then how dark your blacks are going to go, your whites and how light your lights are going to go. This is going to be in 2 different sliders, and then curves is going to be 1 slider. Me personally, I find levels just a little bit easier to work with. Curves gets a little bit more complex. But let's go ahead and redo this, and we'll continue talking about the similarities. Okay, now we're back into our levels adjustment layer. We started off with RGB, okay? Red, green, and blue. It's a combination of our 3 color channels, basically, and when you edit in RGB, right over here, it's just gonna edit light and dark. But if you wanna go in and say, I want to edit just the red channel, for instance, I can do that. And now if I click on this slider, you can see it's gonna give me more red in my image, and the opposite of red is gonna be cyan, okay? So I can say more red or more cyan. Of course, I can do that here with my shadow levels. There we go. I can put reds in my shadows as well. Fantastic. Let's just reset this. And I have access to my other color channels here. So my green channel, I can push and pull more greens if I want. My blue channel, I can push and pull more blues if I want there as well. So can I do that here with curves? Well, yes, I can. Let's go ahead and make sure we're put that back where it belongs. Go home. Okay, fantastic. So yes, I can do that with curves as well. Let's just double click right here on the curves adjustment layer. And then I can go to, for instance, my red channel. Now, there's not a point here in the middle, but you can click and drag to make it more or less reds here in your midtones. There we go. You can do the same thing with green. Click and drag up or down to make more or less greens in your midtones. By the way, if you want to get rid of one of these points, you can hold Control or Command and click on it. It'll go away. Or, let's say you go up here, you just click and drag that all the way off the graph and it'll disappear as well. Okay? Or, of course, you can hit this reset. Now back to the blue channel, again, I can put more or less blues in my midtones. And of course I can do that with my shadows. If I want, you know, less blues in my shadows, but then I want to kind of like recover some blues, I can do that too. All right, fantastic. So let's go back to levels and we're going to talk about our eyedroppers because these are kind of important. So your eyedroppers are going to allow you to choose your black point, your midpoint, and your white point. So for instance, you don't have to use these sliders. I could say like, okay, this right here, I want that to be pure black, or maybe this right here. Boom. So I click there and that becomes pure black. And like literally it adjusts my histogram. Okay. Now this midtone slider, I can click here and say, yeah, that I want to be my midtones. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to neutral out the color too. So wherever you click, you want to make sure that's a target neutral. Like if I click on a yellow, it's going to try to compensate by making my whole image blue, right? So I want to make sure I click on a target neutral, something that's actually like gray in the image itself, and that's going to work a little bit better. Okay, and then the same thing with our lights. I can click on something that's supposed to be white. There we go. There's not much white in this image, but I could click right there and you kind of get the idea. Okay, let's go ahead and reset here all the way back to the beginning, and then back here on the curves. Yep, you have access to the same exact tools. Surprise, surprise. You have your black point, can click there. You have your midpoint, you can click there, and you have your white point, and you can click there. All right, so we've seen how similar curves and levels are. Are there differences between curves and levels? Basically, curves are a more advanced version of levels. With levels, okay, let's go back here to our layers. Let's double click here on the levels. With levels, you basically have these sliders, okay? You have 5 different points in which you can manipulate, right? But I can't add individual points right in here if I wanted to, okay? Like if I want another point right here, I can't add that. If I want another point here, I can't add that either. So with levels, we're limited to 5 different points. Now with curves, let's go back to our curves adjustment layer. To curves, I can add points anywhere I want to along this entire graph. So let's do it. Now there's 2 ways to do this. You can literally just click on this graph. Keep in mind your shadows are here on the left and your highlights are gonna be on the right. So if I click here and drag up, I'm gonna be making my shadows a little bit brighter. But I can go over here and make my highlights a little bit darker at the same time, okay? I can make my strong highlights even darker over here. I can bring this up, I can bring this up again, and I can bring that down. I can add as many points as I want through here to kind of change the light levels with my image. Okay, so this is a lot of different options, a lot of like creativity you can do here as well. Now, when you're looking at this, it can be a little bit confusing of like, how do I know if I want this dark to be lighter or whatever? Like, I'm just looking at a graph. I don't know if I want this point to be lighter or darker. So let's go ahead and hit that reset button. They make it a little easier for you. Within curves, you have this icon here. If you click here, this is actually really nice because then you can go over to your image and you can click and drag up or down on your image, and it's gonna find the light levels of wherever you click, and it's going to adjust those there. So if I want to say, oh, you know what, I want to make my shadows a little bit brighter, I'm going to do that. There we go. I want to make my highlights a little bit darker, click and drag down, I can do that as well. Okay, let's go ahead and reset that and show you one more time. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to click and drag to make my shadows just a little bit brighter. Okay, and then I'm going to click here and make my highlights just a little bit darker. And I'm basically reducing the amount of contrast that's in my image. Now, if I want to increase the contrast, I can click and drag down and say make the shadows darker and make the highlights even brighter, and then I've increased the contrast. So you can see it's pulling the shadows downwards, okay? And it's making the highlights a little bit brighter. Okay, now this is a really, really handy tool that's available in curves. It's not available in levels. So that's the first main difference. Now, check this out. You can do this when you're on RGB, of course, which is gonna edit your red, green, and blue. Basically just your light levels. When you combine red, green, and blue, it's gonna work on your light. But you can also do this with colors. For instance, if you go to your red channel, you can use this same exact icon and you wanna say, you know what, I want more red right over here in my highlights. There we go, just put a little bit more red in our subject's skin. Cool, it'll find that area of light. Now, keep in mind, this is not selecting the subject, this is selecting the light level where we're clicking, okay? So I just add a little bit more red into our subject. I could go to the green, I can click here and drag up and down and say, oh, you know what, maybe something like that looks good. And go to the blue, click up and down. And I'm using this to kind of like color correct my image so my subject's skin looks good. And meanwhile, it's creating these little points here in my curves adjustment. There we go. So when I turn this off and on, you can see I've kind of color corrected this so my subject's skin looks a little bit better. Here's the before. See how her skin looks a little bit green, a little bit desaturated. In the after, her skin has a little bit more red in it, has a little bit more vibrancy to it. So I've done that using curves. There we go, double click here, and this icon with my different color channels. Now, of course, you can go into your levels and work with your different color channels, but I can't add a point right here, for instance, okay? And there's no hand icon. Okay, I could just go to my midpoint and add more reds to the midpoints of my entire image, but I can't choose a specific shadow level or a specific highlight level and add more or less colors to those areas. So that's just one thing to think about. Okay, now that's where we see like kind of the real power of curves versus levels. Let's go ahead and reset all of these. A couple more things I want to show you. Don't forget about auto, because it does a really good job. You click on auto, and basically what it does is this can increase my shadow levels and just kind of like bring the exposure of my image just a little bit better. So there's an auto button here within curves, and there is an auto button within levels as well. Okay, so both of these have curves and levels. Sorry, both of them have auto. There we go. Let's reset them. And the last thing I want to show you here is the presets. So these presets are built in to Photoshop. Like if you just go to lighter, okay, like literally all it does is it just makes a point and makes that a little bit lighter. You know, you could have like strong contrast, and it's going to make a couple different points in there and increase the contrast. So this can be a good place to start with, like, let's say cross process. Boom. See what it does there? So it's actually working on the green channel, it's working on the blue channel, and the red channel. It's doing all three of those, and it's kind of increasing contrast in all those. So in these like little, presets and things like that, they're not that useful in my opinion in terms of like, are you actually going to do this? Like probably not, like some of these are just gonna be way too strong, but it can kind of be a learning tool and show you like, okay, what is it actually doing to these curves or these levels? All right, there we go. And then I'm gonna just click on back on auto, and anything you do here can be reset at any time. Just click on this reset button. And of course, back in levels, you have basically all like very, very similar presets. Light and shadows. You can see there's like contrast stuff, there we go. And midtones, brighter, and things like that. And of course, you can go into your different color channels and add more color and things like that too. All right. So where does this leave us? Like, what's the big takeaway here? If you just want to do simple light adjustments, I think levels are kind of a bit more straightforward and a little bit easier to understand, in my opinion. If you want to work with color, curves are definitely going to be the best way to do that, because you have this little hand tool, and you can go in and say, in the red channel, I want to click and drag just a little bit more reds into the skin. I want to go to my blue channel. You just have to remember that red and cyan are opposites, green and magenta are opposites, and blue and yellow are opposites. So like if you want more yellow, you need to decrease the amount of blue, something to memorize. But you gotta, if you're in your blue channel and you click and drag down, it's gonna increase the yellows that are in your image, okay? So I think this little icon combined with your color channels, if you're gonna be using curves for color corrections, this is gonna be hugely powerful, okay? But for light and dark work, I think levels are great. Okay, the last thing I wanna show you is just some like color toning that you can do here, okay? Like one of my favorite things to do is I like to go into the blue channel and then pull up the amount of blues that are in the shadows, okay? So I'm literally just adding blue to the shadows. I'm making the shadows a little bit lighter, but I'm also adding blue, okay? Just a little bit like that, okay? And I'll go over here to the right-hand side and pull this down a little bit, and this is just gonna put some yellows into my highlights, right? So there we go. You see if I go too far, that's what that looks like, okay? So I'm gonna put some blues into my shadows and yellows into my highlights, and then I turn this off and on, and you can see we have like a really cool color tone image. Of course, you can lower the opacity there as well, okay? Now, if you wanna do that with levels as well, yeah, go to your blue channel, click and drag this slider to get more blues in your shadows, and this slider to get more yellows in your highlights. So you can see I'm achieving essentially the exact same thing in curves and levels. All right, and the last thing I want to show you, let's say we just want to like brighten up your image here. Maybe add a little bit of contrast. There we go. Fantastic. Last thing I want to show you is that yes, you can definitely use layer masks with these as well. So for instance, right now I have my levels adjustment layer, okay? I have a layer mask, it's completely white, making it visible everywhere. But if I hit Control or Command I to invert that layer mask, it's gonna make the layer mask black, and it's gonna be invisible everywhere, okay? Then I hit G for like the gradient tool. There we go, I'm gonna go to the gradient. There we go, let's go to the classic gradient, and then I'm just going to go from white to black. There we go, and let's use a radial gradient. So I'm gonna just do a radial gradient for my subject out, just like this, okay? And basically, I'm just editing my layer mask. So I'm saying, yes, this levels adjustment layer made the entire image lighter, but then with my layer mask, I'm now telling it to just be visible or just be lighter where my subject's face is, okay? And then of course, I can still go in here and make some adjustments if I wanna lighten or darken specific parts of the image. And we can do that the same thing. If I hold Alt or Option, I can click and drag, copy the same exact layer mask. And then of course, if I want to do curves, I can do the same thing. Let's just reset that curves and then take my central point and drag it up. There we go. So you can see I can achieve the exact same thing with curves and levels using a layer mask, and now I'm only affecting a certain part of the image. Well, I hope that helped. That was a big crash course on the difference between curves and levels. Main takeaway is they do almost the exact same thing. So it's whichever one you feel more comfortable with. And for color correction, I suggest using curves because you can get in there with that hand tool and like actually click on your image and drag that up and down to increase or decrease the amount of colors. And then if you're just working with light levels, the levels adjustments are an easier way to go. And then don't forget, there's two ways you can apply these. You can just go to, like, I'll just show you. You can go to image. There we go. Let's click on there. Image adjustments and then curves or levels. Okay. But this applies it directly to the layer. So you don't really want that pretty much almost ever. Just go to layer, down to new adjustment layer, and then do curves and levels from here. That's going to be a little bit better because you can change that setting at any time. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give us a big thumbs up. And if you want to get more free tutorials, click on that subscribe button. Thanks again, and I will Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone.